On January 31st, 1999, 22 million Americans watched a fat man commit welfare fraud, lie to his wife, and dump money from a blimp over the Super Bowl. They laughed. They came back the next week. They kept coming back for 25 years. Family Guy did not sneak onto television. It walked through the front door after one of the most watched sporting events in America, introduced a family that represented everything wrong with the country, and asked one question it has never stopped asking since. Where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely? Then it answered the question by pointing at Peter Griffin. What you are about to watch is not a breakdown of jokes. It is a breakdown of a 25-year argument that one of the most watched shows in American television history has been making in plain sight every single week, while everyone laughed along without fully realizing what was being said. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let's get into it. Peter Griffin was never meant to be liked. He was built to expose the American man. There is a very specific kind of man Seth MacFarlane grew up around in New England. Big, loud, opinionated, Irish Catholic, working class. The kind of man who says whatever is in his head because the thought of holding it back never once crosses his mind. MacFarlane watched those men for years. He studied them. And when Fox gave him $50,000 and a shot at a primetime animated show in 1998, he did not create a lovable everyman. He created a target. Peter Griffin is that target. He has been that target since the very first episode of Family Guy aired on January 31st, 1999. Right after Super Bowl 33, in front of 22 million people who had no idea what they were about to watch.
In that pilot, a man who works as a safety inspector at a toy factory shows up to work still drunk from the night before, falls asleep at his station, and lets dangerous items slip through. A butcher knife, razor blades, a porcupine, a toaster with forks jammed into it, all packed into children's toys headed straight for store shelves. He gets fired. He lies to his wife about it. He commits welfare fraud. He wastes the government money on completely pointless things. He ends up under arrest at the Super Bowl. All of this happens in the first 30 minutes of the show's existence, and the show frames every single moment of it as something to laugh at Peter for, not with him. That distinction matters more than most people realize.
MacFarlane said in interviews that Peter's voice came directly from security guards he overheard during his time at the Rhode Island School of Design. His words were precise. These were guys who would not think before they spoke, as if there was no filter between the thought and the mouth. That was the design. Not a mistake, not a character who accidentally comes across wrong, a man specifically built without the part that tells you to stop before you say the thing. The show announced this in the very first line of its opening theme song, the one that plays every single episode. It starts by asking where all those good old-fashioned values went that people used to rely on. And then it immediately answers by showing you Peter Griffin, a man who represents the complete collapse of every value the song claims to miss. The show is not celebrating those old-fashioned values. It is mocking the idea that they ever really existed.
And it is using Peter as proof. This is the thing that separates Family Guy from most of the shows it was competing with in 1999. The other family sitcoms on television at the time were still operating on the idea that the dad at the center of the story, no matter how bumbling, was fundamentally a good man doing his best. Peter is not doing his best. Peter is selfish, dishonest, and genuinely not very smart. And the show does not soften those things or try to redeem them episode by episode. Peter's ignorance is not a quirk. It is the entire point. MacFarlane was very clear about where Peter came from. In interviews, he described his father's friends, big, vocal, opinionated New England Irish Catholics, as the raw material. These were real men he actually knew, real patterns of behavior he had spent years watching up close. Peter Griffin is the version of that man with everything turned up just enough that you cannot miss what you are looking at. The beer gut, the blue-collar job, the loud opinions about things he knows nothing about, the casual cruelty toward his daughter Meg, the complete inability to process consequences. All of it is pulled from a very specific portrait of a very specific kind of American man. Academic writers who have studied the show at length noticed this from early on. Work done on the show at the University of Georgia described Peter as a portrait of the working-class American male who has been left behind by a changing economy, stuck in a world that no longer works the way he was told it would, and responding to that by doubling down on the behaviors that made him feel powerful, even when they make his situation worse. The show does not say any of this out loud. It never gives you a speech about it. It just lets Peter be Peter, episode after episode, and trusts that you will understand what you are watching. And what you are watching is a man who is supposed to represent the average American father, the breadwinner, the patriarch, the head of the household. And the show is spending 22 minutes every week making the case that this man is, in almost every measurable way, a disaster. He is dangerous at work. He He is dishonest at home. He is thoughtless with money, cruel to his kids without realizing it, and completely unaware of the damage he leaves behind. The show puts Lois in the position of managing all of that, which is its own comment on what American family life actually looks like versus what television had always pretended it looked like. The season 4 episode called Petarded takes this even further. In that episode, Peter discovers through an IQ test that his intelligence technically falls below the threshold for an intellectual disability. The show plays this for laughs, but there is something underneath the jokes that lands differently if you pay attention. Peter does not feel embarrassed by this. He immediately starts using his low IQ as a way to get out of things he does not want to do, treating the result not as something to be upset about, but as a tool to take advantage of. That is not an accident. The show is pointing at something real, the way that a certain kind of man responds to information about his own failures, not with reflection, but with another angle to work. Season after season, the show keeps returning to Peter as a way of asking what American manhood actually looks like when the camera stays on. Not the version men perform in public, the version that exists at home, at the bar with friends, at work when no one important is watching. Peter is that version. He is the man who drinks too much and calls it relaxing. He is the man who does not listen to his wife and calls it being his own person. He is the man who embarrasses his daughter in front of everyone and calls it joking around. And Family Guy watches all of it without blinking and without letting him off the hook. The show has been doing this for over 25 years. Peter has not grown into a better man. The lesson has never arrived, and that is the point. A show that gave Peter a redemption arc would be saying that this kind of man, given enough time and enough love, will eventually figure it out. Family Guy has spent a quarter century refusing to say that. What it says instead is quieter and colder, that this man, this version of the American father and the American male, does not change. He just keeps going. And the country that produced him keeps going with him. The show could have made Peter likable. MacFarlane is clearly smart enough to have done that. He chose not to. Every character note, every joke at Peter's expense, every moment where the camera lingers on the wreckage Peter leaves behind is a deliberate choice. And once you see it that way, once you see Peter not as a bumbling dad, but as an argument the show is making, everything else about Family Guy starts to look different. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, because Peter is just the beginning. The show did not stop at mocking one man. It went after the entire structure surrounding him, the way American men absorb information, the things American culture tells them to pay attention to, the speed at which they move from one thing to the next without stopping to think about any of it. That is where the show's most distinctive weapon comes in, the cutaway gag. And what that device is really doing, underneath all the jokes, is far more pointed than most people watching it ever stop to notice. Section 2. The cutaway gag is America's attention span, and Family Guy has been mocking that since season 1. Before Family Guy existed as a television show, it existed as a college thesis. Seth MacFarlane was a student at the Rhode Island School of Design in 1995 when he made a short film called The Life of Larry. That film had a character named Larry and a dog named Steve. Larry eventually became Peter Griffin. Steve eventually became Brian. The format of the short, quick jokes, rapid shifts, no time spent lingering on anything for too long, carried over into the show. And that format, more than anything else about Family Guy, is the thing that made it different from every other animated show on television when it first aired in 1999. The cutaway gag is exactly what it sounds like. The story stops, the scene cuts, you see something completely separate from what was just happening. A quick joke, usually 5 to 30 seconds long, usually referencing something from American pop culture, and then the show cuts back and keeps going. It has been part of Family Guy from the very first episode. In that pilot, the Griffin family watches a movie together, and Peter, the only one not crying, makes a joke about the actor on screen because he cannot connect the film to anything real. The story stops for the joke. The joke ends. The story resumes. That structure has repeated itself across more than 400 episodes and 25 years of television. MacFarlane has said directly that the cutaway format was built on the style of The Far Side, the single-panel comic strip created by Gary Larson that ran from the early 1980s through the mid-1990s. Each Far Side panel was its own world. There was no continuing story, no setup from the day before, no resolution the next morning. You looked at the panel, you got the joke, and you moved on. MacFarlane wanted that same feeling inside a television show, a series of self-contained moments that did not depend on each other to work. He got it, and the show was built around that idea from the beginning. The cutaways in Family Guy are not random, even when they look that way. The show's writers have explained over the years that the cutaways go through a selection process just like everything else. About 14 writers work on each episode. Gags are pitched, the staff picks the funniest ones, and those make it into the script. The showrunners who have run the show since season 16, Rich Appel and Alex
Sulkin, have said in interviews that the Cutaway format gives the show the ability to comment on anything happening in American culture at any given moment, in the same way a live sketch comedy show would, except Family Guy does it inside an animated sitcom that takes 10 months to produce each episode. The Cutaway is how the show stays current. It is the show's way of pointing at something in American life, making a joke about it, and moving on before anyone can push back. That last part, moving on before anyone can push back, is more important than it sounds. A traditional episode of television builds a story. Characters face a problem.
They try to solve it, they either succeed or fail. The audience follows the logic of that story from start to finish. When a show wants to say something about the world, it usually works that commentary into the story itself. Family Guy threw that structure out. The Cutaway gag does not build toward anything. It does not connect to what came before or what comes after. It is a burst of observation. Here is this thing that exists in American culture. Here is how ridiculous it is. And then it disappears. The show says the thing and escapes before the thing can fight back. This made critics deeply uncomfortable, particularly other shows in the same space.
In April 2006, South Park dedicated a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars to the subject of Family Guy's Cutaway gags. The episode used the Islamic prophet Muhammad storyline as its surface, but the actual target was the Family Guy writing format. South Park creator Trey Parker said openly that he and Matt Stone hated Family Guy, not because it was offensive, but because they felt its jokes had nothing to do with anything happening in the story. In Cartoon Wars Part 2, South Park depicted the Family Guy writing staff as a group of manatees living in a tank, picking up beach balls with words printed on them, a noun, a verb, a pop culture reference, and feeding them into a machine that generated a cutaway gag. 5 balls at a time, a joke arrives. Remove 1 ball, the manatees stop working. That was South Park's argument about how Family Guy wrote its jokes. Seth MacFarlane, speaking at Harvard University on June 7, 2006, addressed the criticism directly.
He spoke in character as Stewie, and said that the cutaways and flashbacks have nothing to do with the story, and are just there to be funny. He called it a shallow thing that South Park is quite above, and said he saluted them for it. His tone was clearly sarcastic. And then 2 years later, in a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone, he called the South Park episode funny and accurate. The Family Guy writing staff, for their part, started calling their own cutaway gags manatee jokes in DVD commentaries. They acknowledged the joke, they kept writing the gags. The staff of The Simpsons and the staff of King of the Hill both reached out to Parker and Stone after Cartoon Wars aired to express support. Parker has said The Simpsons writers hate Family Guy more than he does. The King of the Hill staff reportedly told him he was doing good work.
But here is what all of that criticism missed, and what the people making it perhaps did not want to see clearly. Family Guy was not trying to write the same kind of comedy as those shows. It was writing something different on purpose. And what it was doing on purpose was more pointed than anyone who dismissed it as lazy manatee comedy ever stopped to examine. The cutaway gag is Family Guy's way of treating American culture the way American culture actually works. Think about the way most Americans absorb information on a daily basis. A television advertisement, a news headline, a celebrity name, a movie reference, a political joke, another advertisement. None of it connects to anything else. None of it builds toward a conclusion. It arrives, it passes, and the next thing takes its place. That pattern is not an accident of modern technology. It was already well established in American life by 1999. MacFarlane built a television show whose entire structure mirrors the experience of consuming American media. Short, disconnected, constantly moving, never sitting with anything long enough to feel its weight. The form itself is the comment. When Peter Griffin says it is worse than the time he did something absurd, and the scene cuts to Peter doing that absurd thing,
the show is not just making a joke. It is demonstrating how American memory actually functions. Events do not carry meaning in sequence. They arrive as references. They get repeated until they lose whatever meaning they originally had. They become shorthand. They become the joke itself rather than the thing the joke is about. Family Guy is built entirely out of this process. Every cutaway is a tiny version of how American pop culture remembers itself. Stripped of context, stripped of consequence, reduced to the part that is easiest to repeat at a bar or in a group chat. MacFarlane himself said in a recent interview with Complex that Family Guy unintentionally predicted the age of TikTok. He said the cutaway format was based on the Far Side's single panel structure, and that they could not have known that a 10 to 20 second format would be perfect for how people would eventually watch content on their phones. He called it accidental.
But whether it was accidental or not, the result is the same. A show built in 1999 around the way Americans consume culture was still perfectly shaped for the way Americans consume culture in 2025, because the underlying habit never changed. The speed got faster, the clips got shorter, the attention moved on more
more quickly. Family Guy had been describing that process since before most of the people currently making TikTok videos were old enough to watch television. The showrunners have been direct about what the cutaway format allows. Apple has said in interviews that a 20 or 30-second cutaway is now often seen by more people than the full episode on streaming. The gag escapes the show. It circulates on its own. It reaches people who never watched the episode it came from, who may not even know what show it came from. That is exactly what American culture does with almost everything it produces. The piece leaves the whole. The reference outlives the original. The joke is remembered, and the reason for the joke is forgotten. That is the machine Family Guy built in 1999. A show structured like American distraction itself. A show that pointed at American culture by imitating the way American culture processes itself. Fast, funny, gone before you fully registered what you just saw. The South Park writers were right that the cutaways had nothing to do with the story. That was the point. The cutaway is the story. And the story it tells, every time a scene cuts and a 10-second gag arrives and disappears, is that this is how America thinks. This is the speed at which Americans pay attention. This is what happens when a culture trains itself to move on before anything can settle. The show has been making that argument every episode for 25 years, and it has made it by being exactly the thing it is commenting on, which is a smarter move than most of the people who have mocked it ever gave it credit for. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the cutaway gag was just one of the tools Family Guy used to take shots at the country it was made in. There is a target the show has gone after more consistently, more directly, and with less hesitation than almost any other. A subject that sits at the absolute center of American identity, and that Family Guy has been slowly and deliberately taking apart since its very first season. And it is one that got the show in more trouble than anything else it ever did. Section 3. Family Guy has been attacking American Christianity from the very beginning. Seth MacFarlane has never hidden where he stands on religion. He said it clearly and directly in his own words. I do not believe in God. I am an atheist. I consider myself a critical thinker, and it fascinates me that in the 21st century, most people still believe in, as George Carlin puts it, the invisible man living in the sky. That is not a quote pulled from some obscure corner of an interview. He said it openly, more than once, across multiple years and multiple platforms. The man who created Family Guy, who voices Peter Griffin and Brian Griffin and Stewie Griffin, who spent more than a decade in the writer's room shaping what the show said and how it said it, that man has no belief in God and has been happy to tell the world so. America, on the other hand, is one of the most religious countries in the developed world. Church attendance, belief in God, the role of Christianity in public life and politics and family identity, all of it sits at the center of what millions of Americans understand themselves to be. When you grow up in America, you grow up around religion, whether you practice it or not. It is in the Pledge of Allegiance, it is in the national motto, it is in how politicians speak, how families gather, how people grieve, how communities organize themselves. Religion and American identity have been tied together for so long that for many people, they feel like the same thing. Family Guy walked into that and started swinging from episode 1. In the very first episode of the show, the pilot that aired on January 31st, 1999, there is a brief cutaway where God is shown being embarrassed in church during the story of Job. That gag came directly from MacFarlane's 1995 college thesis film, The Life of Larry, which he made before Family Guy existed as a television show. He thought it was funny enough to put it in the pilot. That tells you something about where his head was from the very beginning. Not sneaking religion jokes into the show slowly, but leading with them from the first 30 minutes. The show did not slow down. Across season 1 and into the seasons that followed, God appeared as a character over and over again, and never as something to be taken seriously. In one cutaway that became famous enough to attract formal protests, God is depicted lying in bed with a woman. Jesus calls him on the phone. God, annoyed at the interruption, hangs up. The woman holds up a condom. God responds by saying, "Come on, baby. It is my birthday." That is not a background joke or a throwaway moment. The show put the creator of the universe in a bedroom with a woman and turned the phone call from his son into an interruption of something he would rather be doing. The Parents Television Council, a conservative group that spent years filing complaints against Family Guy with the Federal Communications Commission, pointed to exactly this kind of scene when they published their 2006 report called Faith Faith in a Box, which concluded that mockery of God was a constant on the show. That report was not wrong. What the show was doing, though, went beyond just making God look ridiculous. The more pointed attack was always on the way religion functions inside ordinary American life. The show is not set in Rome or Jerusalem or anywhere with particular religious history. It is set in Quahog, Rhode Island, a normal American town, a fictional version of the kind of place most Americans grew up in or near. The Griffins are a regular American family. Peter was raised Catholic. The family goes to church. Religion is part of the background of their daily life in the same way it is for millions of American families. And the show spent decade after decade using that setting to ask what all of that religious belief actually produces in the people who hold it. The answer it kept coming back to was not flattering. Season 7, Episode 2 of Family Guy is called I Dream of Jesus, and it aired on October 5th, 2008. It was the most watched program on Fox the night it aired, drawing 8.4 million viewers. In the episode, Peter finds Jesus Christ himself working at a used record store in Quahog. Jesus explains that he comes to Earth every century or so to unwind, but has to keep a low profile. Peter, being Peter, immediately starts telling everyone. Jesus begins making his second coming, showing up on talk shows, walking on water in public fountains, attending the MTV Music Video Awards. He becomes a celebrity, and then he gets arrested after a drinking binge and ends up unconscious at Mary-Kate Olsen's house, where he makes anti-Semitic comments. Peter has to bail him out of jail. The episode treats the Son of God as someone who cannot handle fame, who gets caught up in celebrity culture, who makes offensive comments, and who ultimately has to admit he was not ready to come back. The show is not just making fun of Jesus the person, it is taking the single most sacred figure in the religion that roughly 70% of Americans identified with at the time the episode aired, and running him through the exact same machine it used to mock celebrities, politicians, and pop culture figures. Jesus is not treated differently because he is sacred. He is treated the same because the show does not accept the idea that anything is sacred enough to be off limits. Then came Season 7, Episode 11.
Not All Dogs Go to Heaven,
which aired on March 29th, 2009. Meg gets sick with the mumps at a Star Trek convention after Peter never bothered to get her vaccinated. While stuck in bed, she watches Kirk Cameron on a religious television channel and becomes a born-again Christian. She becomes obsessed with converting everyone around her, particularly Brian the dog, whose atheism she accidentally exposes to the town. When the people of Quahog find out Brian is an atheist, they treat him as if he is something dangerous. A news broadcast runs his image on screen with the words "worse than Hitler" underneath it. He is banned from every bar and convenience store in town. He is cut off from ordinary life entirely, the same way a community might treat someone they have decided is a threat to everything they value. The episode is making a direct argument. It is not subtle about it.
The Christians in Quahog do not come across as thoughtful people of faith who have a reasonable disagreement with an atheist dog. They come across as a mob. Their response to learning someone in their town does not believe what they believe is to destroy his access to normal life. The book burning scene, where Meg leads a group in destroying copies of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species and Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, along with a book called Logic for First Graders, is the show putting its argument in the plainest possible terms. This is what religious panic looks like in an American community. These are the books that go into the fire. Brian eventually talks Meg down by pointing out that if God truly loved her, he would not have given her a beautiful mother like Lois and then had her grow up looking like Peter. He would not have put her in a household where nobody respects her.
The show uses Brian's argument to dismantle Meg's faith, and it does so not through careful reasoning or a fair debate, but by leaning on Meg's pain. That was one of the criticisms the episode drew. But the show was not trying to have a fair debate. It was trying to say something specific about what religion does and does not do for the people who hold on to it when their lives are hard. McFarlane's stated position on this was clear. He said in an interview that he believed there needed to be vocal people pushing for the advancement of knowledge over faith, the way the civil rights movement needed people willing to speak publicly. He compared the effort to be open about atheism to a broader social movement. He was not being vague about his intentions. He had a position, and Family Guy was one of the places he put it. The Parents Television Council watched all of this and responded with formal FCC complaints, public campaigns, and reports. They called the show anti-Christian and argued that it was doing deliberate damage to religious values in American households. They placed Family Guy on their list of worst primetime shows for family viewing in 2000, 2005, and 2006. They named it the worst show of the week on at least 40 separate occasions occasions across the show's run. The people running the PTC understood exactly what the show was doing. They just hated that it was doing it. What the PTC never fully grappled with was the fact that Family Guy was doing something more specific than just insulting Christians. It was pointing at something real, the way American religious culture can tip from sincere belief into something that looks more like a social weapon. The Quahog mob that turned on Brian for being an atheist was not meant to represent every Christian in America. It was meant to represent what happens when belief becomes a reason to exclude, to punish, and to burn the books you do not want other people reading. The show had watched American culture long enough to know that version of religion existed. It had lived in it. McFarlane had grown up Catholic. He had seen what it looked like from the inside. The attack on American Christianity and Family Guy was never really about God. It was about the country that built God into so much of its public identity. The pledge, the money, the political speeches, the family values campaigns. And what happens inside that country when the version of God it is carrying around starts becoming a reason to hurt people instead of help them? That was the argument. The show made it loudly and without apology for over 2 decades on a network owned by one of the most powerful media companies in the world. __quote _2__. And that network connection, the fact that Family Guy has spent 25 years attacking America while airing on a channel run by the same company that owns Fox News, turns out to be one of the most deliberately pointed ironies in the entire history of the show. Because Family Guy did not just mock American religion, it looked the network it aired on dead in the eyes and started attacking that too. Section 4. The show aired on Fox while spending 25 years destroying Fox, and that contradiction was entirely intentional. There is a specific kind of boldness required to spend 25 years attacking the company that pays your salary, on the channel that broadcasts your show, to the audience that channel is trying to win over. Most people in television never go near that territory. Seth MacFarlane has lived there since 1999. Family Guy airs on Fox. It has always aired on Fox. The same Fox that owns Fox News. The same Fox News that MacFarlane has publicly called out by name, in interviews, in character, and through the content of the show itself for years. The relationship between Family Guy and Fox is one of the strangest arrangements in the history of American television. A show that bites the hand that feeds it, repeatedly and deliberately, and somehow the hand keeps feeding it anyway. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand what Fox did to Family Guy before any of the biting started. The show debuted on January 31st, 1999, after Super Bowl 33, to 22 million viewers. That is a massive audience for a first episode of anything. Fox had a hit. Then they moved it around the schedule constantly, putting it in time slots where it had to compete against shows like Friends and Survivor and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The ratings dropped. In 2002, Fox canceled the show. Not for the first time. They had already pulled it off the schedule during season 2 as well. But in 2002, the cancellation was meant to be final. No farewell episode, no announcement, just done. MacFarlane has said he believed it was finished. The show joined what looked like a permanent list of things that used to be on television. What happened next changed how the entire television industry thought about canceled shows. Fox licensed the reruns to Adult Swim, the late-night block on Cartoon Network, where Family Guy became the channel's most watched program, boosting viewership by 239%. At the same time, Fox released the first and second seasons on DVD. Those DVDs sold 2.2 million copies, becoming the best-selling television DVD release of 2003 and the second highest-selling television DVD in history at that point. The third season DVD also sold over 1 million copies. Family Guy was dead, and somehow drawing more attention than most living shows. Fox took notice. In May 2004, the network ordered 35 new episodes, marking the first time in television history that a show had been brought back from cancellation based on DVD sales. The fourth season premiered on May 1st, 2005, to 11.85 million viewers. The show was back, and it came back on Fox, the same network that had killed it twice. The very first episode of that comeback season, North by North Quahog, which was written by MacFarlane himself and aired on May 1st, 2005, opened with a cold scene where Peter tells the family that their show has been canceled. He then lists 29 shows that Fox canceled after Family Guy was pulled from the air. Show after show after show. All of them gone. All of them mentioned by name, with Peter stating that Family Guy was removed to make room for these terrific programs. Lois asks if there is any chance of coming back. Peter says that if all those other shows fail, maybe. Then the opening credits roll. It was one of the most direct pieces of network mockery ever broadcast on that same network, and it aired on Fox at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. That tone never stopped. The show kept poking at Fox across seasons and episodes in ways that were impossible to misread. In one scene, the Fox News daycare facility is shown to have almost no children because their parents have the day off for Martin Luther King Day. The Fox tour guide clarifies that at Fox News, they celebrate on the day he was shot. The joke is brief. It is also about as sharp a thing as you can say about a news network in less than 10 seconds. The biggest and most direct attack came in Season 7, Episode 10, which aired on March 22, 2009, and was called Foxy Lady. In the episode, a Fox News anchor is fired when the network switches to high-definition broadcasting, and the cameras expose her real age. Lois tries out for the position and gets the job. Brian, the dog, tries to stop her from taking it. His words to her, on screen, on Fox, are precise and unambiguous. He says that Fox News is evil, that they distort the truth, and that they do the bidding of the Republican Party. Lois dismisses his concerns. The episode then proceeds to prove Brian right at every step. Lois is assigned to dig up evidence that liberal filmmaker Michael Moore is secretly gay. When she actually finds something that could damage a conservative instead, specifically Rush Limbaugh, her bosses immediately kill the story to protect him. She realizes Brian was completely right. The show, airing on Fox, just used a full 22-minute episode to demonstrate step by step that Fox News protects conservatives from scrutiny while targeting anyone they disagree with. The episode was watched by 7.45 million people on Fox's own channel. The show also went after Fox, the entertainment network specifically, not just its news division. Peter, in multiple episodes, broke the fourth wall to address the network directly. The Season 8 episode Big Man on Hippocampus featured an interruption that referenced Fox slashing the show's budget after a controversial joke. Moments later in the episode, the animation briefly becomes noticeably cheaper and cruder, a visual joke at the network's expense, broadcast on that same network. Outside of the show itself, MacFarlane was equally direct. On September 21st, 2021, he appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live and premiered a 3-minute Family Guy public service announcement about the COVID-19 vaccine. He explained to Kimmel why he made it. He said he looked around and saw everyone else at Fox Corp doing their part to get good science out there and be responsible with their platforms. And looking down the barrel of that kind of peer pressure, he felt he had to do something too. The sarcasm in that statement was clear. He was specifically responding to what Tucker Carlson and others at Fox News had been broadcasting about the vaccine. The PSA used Stewie and Brian to walk viewers through how vaccines actually work inside Peter's body, as a direct counter to what was airing a few channels over on the same parent company's news network. When Kimmel asked him about the contradiction, making a pro-vaccine PSA while his show aired on the same corporation that was spreading vaccine doubt, MacFarlane said something that explained the whole arrangement. He described it as two halves of the same person, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He said the news side was in their imaginary fairyland, while the entertainment side had to exist with those people and try to make the best of it. That description is the clearest window into how this situation actually worked. Fox, the corporation, contains two very different things: a news operation with a defined political identity and an entertainment division that produces content for profit. Family Guy lived on the entertainment side. The entertainment side, as MacFarlane put it, had to exist alongside the news side, whether they liked it or not. And the way Family Guy chose to exist alongside it was to spend episode after episode making clear that it disagreed with almost everything the news side stood for. The show was canceled by Fox twice, brought back by audience demand, and then used its own platform on the network that canceled it to criticize that network in front of millions of viewers, season after season. The Fox News daycare celebrates the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Brian calls the network evil to Lois's face. The show lists every failure Fox made in the years it was canceled, on air for the whole country to see. MacFarlane makes a vaccine PSA specifically because Fox News was spreading anti-vaccine content, premieres it on national television, and then explains publicly that he made it as a response to his own employer. What makes this extraordinary is not just the content of the criticism, it is the structure of the situation. A show survived being killed by a network, came back on that same network, and then spent 2 more decades attacking the institution that owns it, not secretly, not in DVD commentary, but on screen in front of the exact audience the network was trying to keep. That is not an accident. That is a very deliberate choice made by a man who said publicly that he is a liberal, that he finds Fox News irresponsible, and that he believes the advancement of knowledge over blind belief is worth fighting for. The show has now run for over 25 years on Fox. At no point in those 25 years did the attacks on the network stop. At no point did Fox cancel the show over any of it. That fact might say as much about how American media works, and what a network will tolerate when the ratings are good enough, as anything Family Guy has ever put in an episode. __quote_3___. And speaking of what the show would tolerate and what it would not, there is one subject that runs across the entire history of Family Family Guy even more consistently than its shots at Fox. A subject tied to American power, American leadership, and the people the country sends to Washington to make its decisions. From George W. Bush playing with toys in the White House to Peter Griffin becoming a press secretary for Donald Trump,
The show's relationship with American politics has been its most visible and most argued about thread.
and that argument is worth looking at very carefully, because what the show was actually saying about politics was more complicated than most people who watched it ever fully noticed. Section 5. American politics has been the show's punching bag. From George W. Bush to Donald Trump, Family Guy started making fun of American presidents in its very first episode. The pilot that aired on January 31st, 1999, included a cutaway where Bill Clinton was at a press conference being asked why the American public kept supporting him through his impeachment. His answer, delivered directly to camera, was that it was probably because they were so fat. The joke lasted about 3 seconds. It set a tone that the show never abandoned. Over the next 25 years, Family Guy worked its way through every president it shared airtime with, and none of them came out looking like leaders. The show did not treat the presidency as something to be respected. It treated the presidency the way it treated everything else in American culture, as a subject worth pulling apart in front of an audience, piece by piece, until the real thing, underneath the official version, became impossible to ignore. George W. Bush became the show's most frequently used presidential target, simply because he was president for most of the show's most watched years. He was in office from 2001 to 2009, which covered the show's entire revival era, the seasons when Family Guy was at its most watched and most culturally present. Bush showed up in more Family Guy cutaways than any other president, and almost every single appearance used the same approach, depicting him as someone too childish and too clueless to be trusted with the job he held. The most precise of these appearances came in Season 4, Episode 14, which aired on November 6, 2005, and was called PTV. The episode was written by Alex Sulkin and Wellesley Wild as a direct response to the FCC cracking down on television content after the Janet Jackson wardrobe incident at the Super Bowl in 2004. In the cutaway during the episode, the show cuts to an American military base in Vietnam. Bush shows up, ready to fight. A military officer tells him that the war has been over for a while. The year on screen is 1981, about 6 years after the war actually ended. Bush asks if the officer has anything else to do. The officer says he has some cocaine. Bush's face lights up. The joke is short, direct, and packed with 2 separate references to Bush's actual history: his reported avoidance of active duty during the Vietnam War era, and the drug use allegations from his past that had been widely reported during his 2000 campaign. The show did not invent those accusations. It just put them on television in animated form during prime time. Season 4, Episode 2, called The Fat Guy Strangler, aired on November 27, 2005. Brian Griffin, the family dog, is trying to find the president to raise awareness about Hurricane Katrina, the storm that had devastated New Orleans and large parts of Louisiana just weeks before the episode's production window. He finds Bush in a treehouse, hiding. Bush tells Brian to go away because he is reading a children's book, Judy Blume's Super Fudge. The President of the United States hiding in a tree while a city drowns, absorbed in a book for young children. The episode aired while the real-world response to Katrina was still a fresh national wound. Bush's actual handling of the disaster, the delayed response, the visible disconnection from the scale of what was happening, was being debated everywhere. The show put it into a 20-second scene that said everything the debate was saying, without any of the debate. Season 5, Episode 4, called Saving Private Brian, aired in November 2006. Stewie and Brian find themselves in the military and are sent to Iraq. Near the end of the episode, news comes through that democracy has suddenly broken out in Iraq, just as Bush had always said it would. Stewie says there is only one person who had the vision to see this coming. The scene cuts to Bush at the top of a staircase in the White House, absolutely beside himself with joy, because his slinky just made it all the way down the stairs for the first time. He yells for Laura. He wants her to see. The scene uses the exact same setup the show used for the Hurricane Katrina joke, a massive real-world situation that required presidential leadership, resolved with a cutaway showing the president delighted by something a small child would be excited about. The 2 scenes, across 2 different episodes, built a portrait of a man whose mental age was not equal to the office he held. Then, in Don't Make Me Over, a Season 3 episode, Peter is brought to the White House to entertain Bush in person. He puts on a clown's red nose and makes a series of childish faces and noises. Bush laughs until he accidentally knocks a snow globe off his desk, at which point he bursts into tears like a toddler. The show was not being subtle. It was making a specific argument about a specific man in a specific office, episode after episode, and that argument was that the President of the United States was not a serious adult. Bill Clinton got different treatment, which was its own kind of comment. Season 5, Episode 13, called Bill and Peter's Peter's bogus journey, aired on March 11th, 2007. Clinton's car breaks down outside the Griffin house, and Peter helps him out. The two become friends. Clinton takes Peter out and shows him how to still enjoy life, even as he gets older. Then, Lois goes to confront Clinton about being a bad influence on Peter, and ends up sleeping with him instead.
When Peter finds out and visits Clinton's hotel room to talk about it, there is a cut, and then Peter is shown in bed with Clinton as well, completely satisfied. The running joke about Clinton throughout the episode is that he is irresistibly charming to everyone, regardless of gender. His request for a cigar after sleeping with Lois was a direct reference to his affair with Monica Lewinsky, which had been front-page news in America just years earlier. The show was not letting Clinton off the hook. It was just using a different hook, charm and scandal, instead of stupidity and incompetence, because that was the more accurate version of what that particular president represented to the country. The political mockery was bipartisan in the broadest sense. The show went after Democratic politicians and Republican ones. In the season 7 episode, Foxy Lady, Brian describes Fox News as doing the bidding of the Republican Party. And the episode proves him right.
But the show also made fun of Barack Obama and Al Gore in various cutaways, used Brian's liberal politics as the butt of jokes about self-righteous hypocrisy, and had Quagmire deliver a famous speech in season 8, pointing out that Brian's supposedly progressive views were all talk and no action. The show was not a straight political ad for either party. It was something more pointed and less comfortable. A show that believed that almost everyone in power was, in one way or another, failing. Donald Trump arrived in season 17, episode 11, called Trump Guy, which aired on January 13th, 2019. The episode was the 320th episode overall and was written by Patrick Meighan. Trump shows up at the Griffin house and hires Peter as his new press secretary after watching Peter spread false information on local news and deciding he likes the work. The Griffin family moves to Washington. The episode walks through a list of things the show believed about Trump's presidency: his relationship with the truth, his financial claims, the assault allegations against him, the question of Russian interference. All of it worked into the story. Trump tries to assault Meg. When Peter catches him in the act, he quits. Trump then taunts Peter about his failure as a father and a role model, which triggers the episode's central fight, a version of the recurring chicken fight structure the show uses for its biggest physical battles. The fight works its way through Washington landmarks, ends with both men falling off the Washington Monument, and is resolved by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau catching them on an air mattress. The episode received a 5.8 out of 10 rating on IMDb and generated significant debate. Many viewers felt it was not as funny as the Bush-era political jokes, while others felt it said exactly what needed to be said. The showrunners, Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin, were asked about the episode after it aired. Sulkin said that Trump had been very consistent, which actually helped. He was always in the news for doing the same things, which made the episode feel current even though it had been written months before it aired. He also said the show has had left-leaning episodes before, but that they take hard shots all around and have made fun of the Clintons and Barack Obama. That description is accurate. The show never aligned itself fully with any party. What it aligned itself with was the idea that power in America is generally held by people who should be looked at very carefully, with the assumption that what you see at a press conference is not the full picture. That assumption runs through every political joke in the show's history. The slinky on the stairs, the treehouse during Katrina, Clinton in a hotel room with both Peter and Lois, Peter at a press conference inventing facts. The through line in all of it is not left or right, it is distrust. The show does not believe that the person standing at the podium is telling the truth. It does not believe that the policies they describe match what they actually do. It does not believe that the image the president presents to the American public is the real one.
And it has been making that argument episode after episode since Bill Clinton told a press conference that the American public kept supporting him because they were so fat. 25 years. Every president. The same core position. The people running this country are not who they say they are. And the show is going to keep telling you that in the most ridiculous possible terms until someone takes it seriously or the show goes off the air, whichever comes first. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the political shots at Washington were only one piece of the picture. The show's real argument about America was not just about the people in power. It was about the structure underneath them, the thing those people were supposed to be managing. And nowhere in Family Guy is that structural argument clearer or more personal than in the way the show built the town the Griffins live in. Because Quahog, Rhode Island is not just a backdrop, it is the show's most carefully constructed argument. Section 6. Family Guy has spent 2 decades mocking the American dream through the Griffin family's financial reality. The American dream has a very specific shape. You work hard, you earn a steady wage, you buy a house in a decent neighborhood, you raise your kids there, you make enough that your family is comfortable, not rich, but stable, you retire one day with something to show for it. That is the deal. That is what American culture has sold to working people for generations. The promise that if you show up and do your job, the system will hold up its end. Peter Griffin has been showing up and doing his job since January 31st, 1999. The system has not held up its end. And Family Guy has been documenting that gap, episode after episode, for over 2 decades. Peter started the show as a safety inspector at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. That was his job. He went to work, he fell asleep at his station because he was hungover from a party the night before, and dangerous items shipped out to children because nobody was checking. He got fired in the first episode. He committed welfare fraud in the first episode. The man responsible for making sure children's toys were safe could not stay awake long enough to do his job, and the show introduced him this way on purpose, not as a one-off moment of bad luck, but as a portrait of what happens when the system puts someone in charge of something they were never equipped to handle. He worked at that toy factory until season 3, when his boss, Jonathan Weed, choked to death on a dinner roll while having dinner with the Griffins. After that, Peter briefly became a fisherman on a boat he named the SS more powerful than Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and the Incredible Hulk put together, along with 2 Portuguese immigrants named Santos and Pascoal. That boat was eventually destroyed. Then, starting in season 4, with the episode called Jungle Love, Peter went to work at the Pawtucket Brewery, where he has worked ever since. That job, in the shipping department of a beer factory, became his permanent occupation for the rest of the show's run, which at the time of writing has lasted more than 20 seasons. A safety inspector, a fisherman, a brewery shipping department worker. Those are the jobs of a man for whom the economy has never opened a door wider than a factory floor or a warehouse. Peter is not upwardly mobile. He is not climbing. He's not building towards something. He is maintaining, barely, and often not even that. The show has never pretended otherwise. Peter gets fired from the brewery regularly. In the season 12 episode called Peter Problems, which aired on January 5th, 2014, he is fired for driving a forklift through a wall into an executive meeting after drinking an entire vat of beer. Lois has to take a job at a grocery store to keep the family going. Peter becomes a stay-at-home father, handles it badly, and spends much of the episode unable to function in any of the roles that define his life. He eventually gets his job back at the brewery, but only after a humiliating process involving expired coupons and management's pity. That pattern, Peter losing his job, the family scrambling, things barely returning to normal, runs across the show's entire run. It is not treated as unusual. It is treated as the rhythm of this family's life. They live in a house on Spooner Street that they are always on the edge of not being able to afford. They drive old cars. Their vacations, when they happen, go wrong in ways that only people without money for mistakes can understand. The kids wear the same clothes in most episodes. There is no savings account mentioned. There is no investment, no retirement plan, no safety net visible anywhere in the Griffin household. What makes this more pointed is who Lois comes from. Lois Griffin was born Lois Pewterschmidt. Her father is Carter Pewterschmidt, one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island. He has a mansion, a yacht, horses, and the particular cruelty of someone who has never had to wonder where the next bill payment is coming from. The show uses Carter constantly to put the Griffin family's financial situation in direct relief. The Pewterschmidt house is enormous. The Griffin house is small. Carter has staff. Peter has Lois. Carter can buy anything. Peter can barely hold a job. The show makes the class gap between these two worlds explicit and uncomfortable. Carter does not like Peter. He has never liked Peter. He looks at his daughter's husband and sees a man who was not supposed to be in his family, a working-class factory worker who somehow ended up married to a Pewterschmidt. Episodes that bring the two worlds together, the Griffin home and the Pewterschmidt estate, work because the gap between them is so large and so real. It is not exaggerated for the show. It is the actual gap that exists in American life between working-class families and the old money class above them. The show just put it on screen every week and let viewers sit with it. Season 4, episode 6, called Petarded, which aired on June 19th, 2005, is the episode that pushes the class and intelligence argument furthest. At a game night with the neighbors, Lois secretly gives Peter the preschool edition of Trivial Pursuit so he can win. He becomes insufferable, convinced he is a genius. Brian, tired of it, dares him to take an official IQ test for the MacArthur Genius Grant. The results come back. Peter's IQ score puts him in the range of an intellectual disability. The show then watches what Peter does with this information. He does not seek help. He does not use it as a moment of reflection. He immediately starts using his diagnosis as a way to get away with things, kicking open bathroom stall doors, saying inappropriate things into microphones at restaurants, treating his condition as a free pass to do whatever he wants without consequences. The episode was ranked first on IGN's list of the top 15 Family Guy episodes published in 2014 for the
the show's 15th anniversary. What that ranking captures is how much the episode works as something more than a shock comedy piece. It is a portrait of a man who, when given information about his own limitations, turns that information into a weapon to avoid accountability. The show does not let him get away with it. He pours hot oil on Lois while trying to steal a deep fryer. Child Protective Services takes his kids. He nearly goes to prison. The diagnosis that was supposed to protect him ends up exposing exactly how badly equipped he is to manage consequences of any kind. This is the version of the American dream that Family Guy keeps returning to. Not the version where the hardworking man builds something solid. The version where the working class man is one forklift accident from losing his job, one bad decision from losing his kids, one medical test from having to look directly at the gap between what he believed about himself and what the evidence actually shows. The system that was supposed to protect him, steady work, a decent house, a stable family, sits on a foundation that the show keeps demonstrating is much less stable than the people inside it realize. The show puts Peter's situation next to Carter Pewterschmidt's and never lets the viewer forget the distance between them. Carter can weather almost anything because money is a wall against most of what goes wrong in life. Peter has no such wall. Every time something goes wrong in the Griffin household, the full weight of it lands on the family because there is nothing underneath them to absorb it. That is the argument. Not made in a speech, not delivered through a character who tells the audience what to think, but built into the structure of every season through the jobs Peter holds, the things that go wrong, and the way the family keeps landing right back at the edge of the same cliff they almost fell off before. The show could have given Peter a comfortable job and a stable income. It chose not to. It chose to keep him in a brewery, getting fired and rehired, while Lois's father stands a short drive away with more money than the Griffin family will ever see. That choice is not neutral. It is the show's most sustained and quiet argument about what the American economy actually produces for the people who show up and do the work every day without powerful connections or inherited wealth or any of the other things that make the difference between the Griffins and the Pewterschmidts. __quote_5___. There is another corner of this picture that the show built even more deliberately. The Griffins live in a specific town, not just a backdrop, but a place the show constructed to hold the full weight of its argument about American suburban life. And what that town looks like, when you really look at it, is something the show spent over 2 decades making impossible to ignore. Section 7. The show turns the American suburb into a crime scene. Quahog is the ugliest version of the American dream. Quahog, Rhode Island does not exist. You cannot drive there. You cannot look it up on a map. It is a completely invented town, which is exactly the point. Seth MacFarlane and producer Danny Smith decided the show needed to be set in a specific named place. Fox wanted them to ground the series in a real location. MacFarlane, who had attended the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence and knew the state well, pushed for Rhode Island. Smith, who had previously written a joke about the real town of Pawtucket and ended up being attacked on local radio for it, insisted the town itself had to be fictional. He did not want another real place's mayor coming after him. So they built Quahog. MacFarlane has said in interviews that the town was modeled after Cranston, Rhode Island, a suburb of Providence. The Providence skyline is visible from the Griffin backyard in nearly every outdoor scene. 3 specific real buildings appear in the background, from left to right. 1 Financial Plaza, 50 Kennedy Plaza, and the Industrial National Bank building. MacFarlane borrowed real Rhode Island names throughout. The Pawtucket Brewery is named after the real city of Pawtucket. The school was named after real actor James Woods. The fictional beer brand, Pawtucket Patriot Ale, pulls from local identity. He built a town that feels like a real New England suburb, populated it with recognizable American types, and then spent 25 years showing what life actually looks like inside that kind of place. What it looks like is not pretty. The Griffins live at 31 Spooner Street. So do most of their neighbors. The Swansons, the Browns, and Glenn Quagmire all live on the same block. The street is the whole world of the show for long stretches. 4 houses, 4 families, a bar called the Drunken Clam down the road where the men drink. That is the radius of ordinary life in Quahog, and the show has been using that radius to examine what goes on inside an American suburb when you stop pretending it is fine. What goes on inside is quite a lot. Domestic violence happens on Spooner Street. Drug arrests happen on Spooner Street. Neighbors cover up crimes for each other. The police, represented by Joe Swanson, are friendly with the people committing crimes because they all drink at the same bar. The local news is run by a vain, incompetent anchor named Tom Tucker, who cares more about his hair than the stories he reads. The mayor for most of the show's run was Adam West, a man who regularly made decisions that made no sense to anyone. Every institution in Quahog, the police, the media, the local government, is either corrupt, incompetent, or both. Season 10, episode
Episode 3, Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, aired on October 30th, 2011, and is one of the most revealing episodes in the show's entire run. It is about Quagmire's sister Brenda and her violently abusive boyfriend Jeff. The episode is not a comedy. It is, for the most part, a straight portrait of what domestic violence looks like inside a Quahog household. Jeff hits Brenda in public, in front of neighbors, repeatedly. Lois watches and is horrified. Peter shrugs. Joe, the police officer who literally lives on the same street, tells Quagmire he cannot make an arrest unless Brenda files a formal complaint. The law, as Joe presents it, requires the victim to take the first step, even when everyone can see what is happening, even when the evidence is standing right in front of them with a black eye. The episode drew strong negative reactions when it aired. A Jay Hammer of Showbiz Tonight called it shocking and described it as a depressing half-hour of television. A TV critic for the AV Club gave it a C grade. Media analysts noted it was trying to seriously address a topic that the show had previously used as a source of jokes, and that the combination did not work. But whatever its failures as an episode of television, it is one of the clearest pictures the show ever drew of Quahog as a place where serious damage happens to real people in real houses, while their neighbors watch and look for reasons not to get involved. The resolution, Quagmire, Peter, and Joe take Jeff on a hunting trip and kill him, was not a joke. It was the show saying, through its characters, that the system available to Brenda was not going to save her, so the men around her decided to handle it themselves. That is its own disturbing statement about what a community does when its official institutions fail. Season 7, Episode 12, called 420, aired on April 19th, 2009. In this episode, Brian is arrested for marijuana possession after being pulled over. The police ignore the fact that Peter has just accidentally killed a cat in the same incident. That is handled as a joke, but a bag of marijuana in the car results in an immediate arrest. Brian begins a campaign to legalize marijuana in Quahog. He performs a musical number with Stewie in the town square. Mayor West passes a law legalizing it. The entire town starts using it. Brian reports to the others that crime has gone down and productivity has gone up since legalization. Then, Lois's father Carter, who makes money in the timber industry, realizes that hemp is replacing wood in many products and starts losing money. He bribes Peter with the promise of publishing Brian's book if Peter helps with an anti-marijuana campaign. Peter agrees. The campaign works. Marijuana is made illegal again. Brian's book never sells a single copy. The episode is a complete picture of how policy in Quahog actually gets made. Not through evidence or community benefit, through money. Carter has financial interests. He uses Peter, who can be bought, with the promise of something he wants. The policy reverses. The town goes back to the way it was. Nothing that was actually better for the people of Quahog matters once a wealthy person's financial interests are threatened. That is not a subtle argument. The show put the whole mechanism on screen in 22 minutes. Quahog has been flooded, burned, invaded, transformed into a British pub, and nearly destroyed more times than can be counted. Cleveland Brown's house, which sits at the end of the same block as the Griffins, falls apart or gets demolished so regularly that it became one of the show's most reliable running jokes. A bathtub crashes through the side of his house in Season 3, in the episode 1 If by Clam, 2 If by Sea. It happens again in later seasons. The structure of Cleveland's house is somehow always compromised, always falling apart, always requiring repair that never quite happens. Whether this was intended as a commentary on anything, or simply developed as a running gag, the effect across seasons is a black family on the same street as the White Griffins, whose house is perpetually in a state of damage that no one fully fixes. The local high school was named after real actor James Woods for most of the show's run, and was briefly renamed Adam West Regional High School in Season 17, following the death of the actor Adam West in 2017. Meg and Chris attend that school. Meg is bullied there constantly, by her peers, occasionally by teachers, and sometimes by her own family. The school is not a place of growth or opportunity. It is a place where the social cruelties of adult American life get practiced on teenagers. The popular kids humiliate the unpopular ones. Nobody with authority does anything meaningful about it. This is not treated as a problem to be solved. It is treated as the background condition of life in Quahog. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter and his friends spend most of their time, is a place where men go to avoid dealing with what is happening in their lives. Over the seasons, it has been taken over by a British owner, restored, changed management several times. In Season 11, the original bartender Horace dies. The bar keeps going, Quahog keeps going, nobody grows, nothing improves, the same problems recur in the same houses on the same street, and the show watches all of it with the detached eye of something that has long since stopped being surprised by any of it. This is the show's deepest argument about America, and it is made not through speeches or cutaway gags, but through the architecture of a
fictional town. Quahog is America as it actually functions for ordinary people, not the version sold in political speeches, not the version in Norman Rockwell paintings, not the version on greeting cards about community and family values. It is the version with the domestic abuse happening next door, and the police officer who lives on the block looking for a legal reason not to intervene.
The version where the guy with money decides the town's drug policy.
The version where the same family ends up in the same problems every season because nothing about their situation has actually changed. MacFarlane said he built the show around the kinds of men he saw growing up in New England. Big, opinionated, working-class Irish Catholics. He put them in a suburb and built a town around them. Then he spent 2.5 decades showing what that suburb looks like from the inside when you take away the polished version that American culture usually presents. Quahog is not a backdrop. It is the argument, and the argument has been running, without interruption, since January 1999. __quote _6 __. But if Quahog represents the American suburb stripped bare of its comfortable image, there is a separate and equally sharp argument Family Guy has been making through how it treats the real people who exist outside that suburb. The show's record on race, who it laughs at, who it laughs with,
and what it does with that distinction is one of the most debated and least settled questions about what Family Guy actually believes.
And that argument is worth looking at carefully because the answer is messier than either side of it usually admits. Section 8. Family Guy's treatment of race is a mirror held up to American society's own hypocrisies. For the first 21 seasons of Family Guy, the character Cleveland Brown, the show's main recurring black character and one of Peter Griffin's 4 closest friends, was voiced by a white man named Mike Henry. Henry had been part of the show since the very first episode in January 1999. He created the voice, shaped the character, and kept the role for over 2 decades. Then, on June 26, 2020, he posted a statement on Twitter that said, "It has been an honor to play Cleveland on Family Guy for 20 years. I love this character, but persons of color should play characters of color. Therefore, I will be stepping down from the role."
By September 25, 2020, Arif Zahir, a black YouTuber who had been doing Cleveland Brown impressions to millions of subscribers for years, was announced as the new voice. He began recording for season 19, which aired in 2021. For the first time in the show's history, a black character was voiced by a black actor. That handover, and the 21 years that preceded it, tells you almost everything you need to know about Family Guy's complicated history with race in America. The show spent more than 2 decades putting a black character on screen, making him one of the 4 main male friends, giving him enough story to eventually spin off into his own show, The Cleveland Show, which ran from 2009 to 2013, and doing all of it with a white man providing the voice. The decision to finally change that did not come from inside the show. It came from the broader cultural moment of 2020, when the murder of George Floyd and the conversations that followed put pressure on every corner of American media to examine who was speaking for whom and why. Family Guy's racial satire has always been one of the most debated parts of the show, and the debate is real on both sides. There is no clean answer here, which is actually the most honest thing you can say about it. The show's defense of its approach has always been the same one Seth MacFarlane stated publicly. It is an equal opportunity offender. Everyone gets mocked. White people get mocked. Black people get mocked. Asian people get mocked. Every group takes shots. Because no group is spared, the argument goes, the mockery is not directed at anyone specifically. It is just the nature of the format, which treats everything in American culture as fair game. MacFarlane said this when Bristol Palin criticized the show for mocking her brother who has Down syndrome. The show's representative at the time said the character in question was aimed at Sarah Palin's politics, not her son. Andrea Faye Friedman, the actress with Down syndrome who voiced the character in question, supported that interpretation. The equal opportunity argument has real weight. Family Guy does mock white people constantly. Peter Griffin himself is the clearest example the show has. A white Irish-American man whose ignorance, entitlement, and bigotry are the subject of mockery across hundreds of episodes. The show uses Peter to point at the specific prejudices of white working-class American men, and it has done so without pulling punches since the pilot aired. Brian's hypocritical liberal politics, which pretend to care about everyone while mostly serving his own ego, get mocked just as consistently. The show does not build a protected class of people who cannot be touched, but the academic research on Family Guy's racial humor, including peer-reviewed work from multiple universities, consistently raises a harder question. Who is doing the mocking, and at whose expense? Cleveland Brown's character, as described in a published thesis from SUNY Cortland specifically about Family Guy and race, is portrayed as mild-mannered, slow-speaking, and submissive. The thesis argues this reinforces old stereotypes about black men rather than challenging them. Cleveland rarely pushes back when insulted. He accepts mistreatment from the people around him without strong reaction.
actions. In a season 14 episode called He's Blah-ack, when Cleveland returns to Quahog after the cancellation of the Cleveland show, Quagmire's first words to him reference the fact that people barely noticed his spinoff. Cleveland does not respond to this insult. He absorbs it. The pattern, the black character being the butt of the joke without the show fully committing to examining why, runs through years of Cleveland scenes. Season 12, episode 18, called Baby Got Black, aired on April 27, 2014. In this episode, Chris Griffin falls for a black girl named Pam, whose father, Jerome, does not want his daughter dating a white boy. The episode eventually shows Jerome and Peter being pulled over by a police officer, even though they have done nothing wrong. Jerome tells Peter this happens to him all the time. He gets pulled over by racist police multiple times a day, treated like a criminal, regardless of what he is actually doing. The show does something serious with this moment. It presents a recognizable, documented reality of what many black Americans face in their daily lives. Peter is visibly struck by it. The episode's ending has Jerome realizing that his own prejudice against white people mirrors the prejudice directed at him. The AV Club's review of Baby Got Black called it an episode with a germ of a real idea that fell totally flat, largely because the show could not commit to the weight of what it was trying to say. The reviewer noted that Family Guy hides behind refusing to take anything seriously, which means it can also never say anything seriously. That is an accurate description of the tension at the center of the show's racial humor. It wants credit for pointing at real things: police brutality, racial prejudice, the double standard applied to black men in American life, while also protecting itself from full accountability by framing everything as a joke. What the SUNY Cortland research describes as the result of this tension is a type of humor that gestures toward a serious critique, while often putting the stereotypes it pretends to question back into circulation. The example it gives is the way the show uses hyperbolic racial moments that could read as satire to a viewer familiar with the history of those stereotypes, but could just as easily be absorbed as confirmation of those stereotypes by a viewer who is not. The show created humor for a very wide audience, with very different levels of media knowledge, and it did not always control what that audience took away from the jokes. The show's writing room itself was a core part of the problem. For most of Family Guy's run, that room was overwhelmingly white. The people deciding which racial jokes to make, which moments to push further, which stereotypes to lean into, and which to pull back from, were largely not the people whose communities were being depicted. Mike Henry himself named this when he stepped down. His statement, "Persons of color should play characters of color," acknowledged something the show had been doing for 21 years without examination, using a white man to perform a black identity for a white-dominated writer's room in front of a mass audience. The recasting of Cleveland was not the end of that conversation for Family Guy. The show still has a mostly white writing staff producing racial humor, but the recasting was a public acknowledgement that something about the prior arrangement had been wrong, which is itself a kind of statement. A show that spends 25 years mocking America's racial hypocrisies while running its own version of the same hypocrisies for 21 of those years, that is not a coincidence. It is a portrait of the exact tension that makes American race conversations so difficult. The show was doing, on a smaller institutional scale, exactly what it was pointing at on a larger national one. The equal opportunity argument was never fully false and never fully true at the same time. That is what makes Family Guy's record on race so hard to pin down simply. It pointed at real things. It also reinforced some of the things it pointed at. It mocked white prejudice and sometimes participated in it. It spent 21 years with a white man voicing its main black character, and then, in 2020, acknowledged that had been wrong. The show is simultaneously a critique of American racial divisions and an example of them, which might be the most American thing about it. __quote_7__. But race was only one of the identity questions the show kept raising and could not fully resolve. The way Family Guy treated gender, what it said about women, what it did with Meg, and what Lois's entire marriage to Peter was actually showing, opens a separate and equally messy conversation about what the show believed about American men and the women who lived with them. Section 9. Family Guy has spent 2 decades mocking American masculinity, sports culture, and the cult of the alpha male. Meg Griffin does not have an origin story that explains why her family treats her so badly. There is no episode where someone sat down and decided she would be the one everyone hates. It just started happening gradually, became a habit, and then became a running feature of the show, so baked into the DNA of the Griffin household that by the middle seasons, it had its own name. Peter's go-to response to anything she said became "Shut up, Meg." 3 words that summed up how the family felt about her existence without needing any further explanation. Meg is the oldest Griffin child. She is a teenager attending attending James Woods Regional High School in Quahog, where the popular kids bully her relentlessly and the teachers barely notice she exists. At home, the pattern is the same. Her parents dismiss her. Her brothers ignore or insult her. She has been publicly humiliated by her father, disguising himself as a teenage boy to infiltrate her school, then ditching her for the popular girl instead of helping her. She has been excluded from family activities, left behind when the family drives away, and told directly and repeatedly that she is worthless, ugly, and unwanted. Brian, the dog, who acts as the voice of reason across most of the show's run, is one of the few characters who treats her with any consistent kindness. What the show does with Meg is not random. It is a portrait of what happens to the person in a family who has the least power and the least ability to make anyone pay attention to what they are doing to her. Every dysfunction in the Griffin household gets pointed at Meg because she is the most available target, the one with the fewest resources to fight back, the least status inside and outside the house, and the least likelihood of causing any meaningful consequences if pushed too far. The show made this argument explicit in Season 10, Episode 2, called Seahorse Seashell Party, which aired on October 2nd, 2011. The episode was part of a 3-show crossover block that ran across Family Guy, The Cleveland Show, and American Dad, all dealing with the same hurricane hitting their respective towns. With the family trapped inside during the storm and the TV knocked out, the Griffins have to spend time together without anything to look at. Meg, having absorbed years of abuse with almost no pushback, finally loses it. She confronts Peter, Lois, and Chris directly, calling out each of them specifically for their treatment of her, their failures as parents and a brother, and the damage they have done to her over years of constant dismissal. The specifics of what she says matter. To Lois, she points out that the so-called role model mother who tells her daughter how to live has her own past full of behavior she has never accounted for. To Peter, she calls him a waste of a man and points out his destructive habits and the reality that if anyone from outside the family could see what he does to her, he would face real consequences. To Chris, she names what a failure of a brother he has been. The family, hearing these things said out loud, turns on each other, each of them suddenly directing the kind of criticisms they normally aim at Meg toward the other people in the room. Peter runs upstairs in tears. The family falls apart within minutes. Meg and Brian are left alone. Brian tells her that what she did was brave, that she was right, that she stood up for herself, and it was the right thing to do. Meg thinks about it. She looks at what just happened, the family destroying itself the moment the thing that held it together was removed, and she reaches a conclusion that the AV Club's reviewer, writing about the episode, called one of the most uncomfortable moments the show ever produced. She decides to go back to being the lightning rod. Her exact words, spoken to Brian, are that she thinks it is her lot in life to absorb the family's dysfunction. Maybe if she feels bad, they do not have to. She walks back into the family room, apologizes to Peter, Lois, and Chris for making them feel bad, and takes the blame for the fight back onto herself. The family immediately returns to normal, hugging, feeling better about themselves. The abuse resumes. Nothing has changed. The AV Club reviewer gave the episode a D+ and wrote that the show had spent years going down the path of least resistance by joining the fan chorus of hatred toward Meg, rather than developing her as a character. The reviewer said one episode of pointed justification for that approach did not change a thing. That criticism is accurate, but what the episode was also doing, underneath the bad storytelling decision to have Meg absorb the abuse again, was showing something genuinely true about how abuse works in families. The person with the least power often becomes the stabilizing force the family depends on, and they stay because leaving would require the rest of the family to confront itself. Meg staying is not noble. It is the show depicting, with uncomfortable accuracy, how people who are treated badly inside their families often remain in those families because the damage has become load-bearing. The treatment of Meg across the show's run connects directly to what the show was always saying about American masculinity through Peter. Peter is the man of the house. He is the father, the breadwinner, the authority figure, and he has spent 25 seasons abusing his daughter, physically intimidating her, publicly embarrassing her, calling her ugly and worthless, putting her last in every family decision, without any consistent consequence or growth. The show's own opening theme asks where those good old-fashioned values went. Meg is one part of the answer. The good old-fashioned American family, the show keeps suggesting through Meg's existence, has always had a person designated to absorb the worst of everyone else's behavior. The family values are real. They just mostly apply to everyone except the person at the bottom. The women of the show more broadly tell a version of the same story. Lois Griffin started the series as a recognizable type, the smart, patient wife of a hopeless husband, holding the family together through sheer force of competence and will. She comes from wealth. She married down in every measurable sense when she chose Peter. She gave up opportunities. An Olympic diving team, according to one episode, was something she had to step away from when she became pregnant with Meg, to become a stay-at-home mother in a house that continually falls apart because of what her husband does to it.
The academic research on Family Guy, including the work published through Brigham Young University, describes Lois as the show's attempt at satirizing the myth of the American mother, the devoted housewife with faith in God and her family, by surrounding her with a reality that constantly contradicts and undermines what that image is supposed to represent. The academic work on Peter's masculinity, including the University of Georgia thesis on the show, argues that Peter represents the working-class American male's relationship to a changing economy and a cultural landscape that no longer rewards the behaviors that were supposed to make him feel powerful. He cannot be the protector because he keeps creating the danger. He cannot be the provider because he keeps losing his job. He cannot be the authority because nobody in the house actually listens to him. So he compensates by treating the person with the least ability to resist him, his daughter, as a target for everything he cannot control anywhere else. The show put these dynamics on screen for over 2 decades and never resolved them. Peter did not grow into a better father to Meg. Lois did not stop accepting behavior that the show itself kept showing was unacceptable. The dysfunction ran forward without a fix, season after season, because the show was not telling a story about a family getting better. It was telling a story about a family that stays exactly the way it is, which is its own argument about the American family unit that most family comedies do not have the nerve to make. The show's treatment of gender ran alongside its treatment of sexuality, of male friendship, of the culture around sports and physical strength and what men are supposed to want from each other and from the women in their lives. Glenn Quagmire, the Griffin's neighbor, is a documented sexual predator whose behavior is played as a comedy character across every season of the show. Joe Swanson, the police officer on the same block, is a man whose disability becomes the subject of jokes about strength and weakness and what a man is worth when the physical power that defined him is taken away. The show put all of these men in the same neighborhood and let them interact for 25 years, and what emerged across that time was a consistent portrait of what American male identity looks like under pressure: self-protective, often cruel, and almost entirely unwilling to examine itself. Which brings the whole picture to a harder question, because the show has spent its entire run doing something that goes beyond just pointing at the ugliness in American culture. It has been asking, through every character and every season, whether the things it is showing can change. And the answer it keeps coming back to is one of the most pointed things any American television show has ever said. Not through a speech or a lesson, but through the fact that it is still on the air, still on Fox, still in the same house on Spooner Street, still doing the same things it has always done. __quote_8___. And that answer has a much bigger shape than one show on one network. Because Family Guy, for all its specific targets and individual episodes, was never really just about the Griffins. It was about the country that produced the Griffins. The same country that laughed at them, watched them every week, bought the DVDs, brought the show back from cancellation, and kept watching for 25 years. The most uncomfortable truth the show has to offer is not about Peter or Meg or Fox News. It is about the audience. Section 10. American celebrity culture has been getting destroyed on this show since 1999. There is a scene early in Family Guy's run where the Griffin family is watching television. This is not unusual. The Griffins watch an enormous amount of television, and the show has always known it. What is interesting is what the show does with those moments. It uses them to point at the screen and ask what exactly it is that American audiences have decided to worship. Family Guy has been doing this to American celebrity culture since 1999, not as a side project, not as an occasional cutaway, as one of the most consistent threads running through the entire show, a relentless episode after episode examination of what happens when a country decides that fame is the same thing as value, that being known means being important, and that the people on television deserve the reverence most cultures historically reserved for something more substantial. The show's relationship with sports celebrities started early and went deep. Season 4, episode 20, called Patriot Games, aired on January 29th, 2006, 1 week before Super Bowl 40. It is the most complete version of the show's argument about American sports culture in a single episode. The setup is precise. Peter Griffin, who works at a brewery and has no discernible athletic training or ability, gets recruited to play for the New England Patriots after Tom Brady watches him crash through a crowd of people at a high school reunion to get to the bathroom. Brady is impressed by the violence of it. Peter gets the job. Tom Brady voiced himself in the episode. So did Troy Brown, the former Patriots wide receiver. So did Jay Leno, Bob Costas, and Carol Channing. The episode aired
aired the week before the biggest sporting event in America, and it spent 22 minutes taking apart everything about the culture surrounding that event. Peter gets immediately corrupted by the attention. He starts doing local car dealership commercials, spending money on ridiculous things like a $30,000 wax sculpture, and showboating during games in ways that get progressively more over the top. He is eventually fired for leading the entire stadium in an elaborate choreographed musical number after a single touchdown. The point is not subtle. An overweight, incompetent, working-class man with no skills gets handed one of the most coveted positions in American sports because he impressed a star athlete with an act of accidental physical aggression. And within weeks, he has fully absorbed the entitlement, ego, and self-importance that American sports culture assigns to the people it elevates. He did not earn any of it. The culture gave it to him, and he took it. The show watches this happen without commentary, which is how it usually makes its sharpest points, by showing the process clearly enough that the observation requires no explanation. Season 12, Episode 13, also called 3 Acts of God, which aired on March 16, 2014, takes the sports culture critique further by adding religion to it. Peter, tired of watching opposing football teams thank God publicly after beating the Patriots, decides he and his friends need to actually find God and ask him to stop messing with the Patriots' outcomes. They do find God. God tells them he has been disfavoring the team because head coach Bill Belichick refuses to smile despite being given 3 Super Bowl victories. Peter negotiates a deal. If they can make Belichick smile, God will leave the Patriots alone. The episode treats the intersection of religious faith and sports fandom, one of the most distinctly American cultural combinations in existence, as exactly the absurd arrangement it is. The God of the universe is deciding football games based on whether a coach has the right attitude. This is what American sports and American religion look like when placed next to each other in the same frame. Celebrity culture beyond sports got the same treatment, running across every season. The show's approach was never the same twice, but the underlying argument was always consistent. American fame culture produces people whose public identities are almost entirely manufactured, whose behavior under that fame reveals something unpleasant, and whose relationship with the public is built on a kind of mutual dishonesty, where everyone pretends the performance is real. Tom Cruise appeared across multiple Family Guy episodes as a running fixation of the show. In the episode Meet the Quagmires, a cutaway shows Cruise constantly running in his films, and suggests he is running away from thoughts he does not want to have. In the episode Lois Kills Stewie, a scene shows actress Katie Holmes' ankle bracelet deactivating, at which point she escapes Cruise and frees men being kept in a cage. In the episode Papa Has a Rollin' Son, the show introduces the character of Tiny Tom Cruise, a small version of Cruise who befriends Stewie because of their shared small stature, only to become a stalker when the relationship ends. Across these appearances, the show was not making jokes about Tom Cruise the actor. It was making jokes about Tom Cruise the celebrity institution, the constructed public image, the tabloid narrative, the gap between the image and whatever the reality beneath it might be. Justin Bieber received similar treatment across multiple seasons. His season 11 appearance in the episode Lois Comes Out of Her Shell placed him at a concert where a woman in the audience described his appeal as gender fluid, before Peter took over the stage and presented the character of Conway Twitty, the old-fashioned country singer the show used as a recurring joke, with a Bieber haircut. The show later described Bieber in the episode An App a Day as a celebrity who became successful despite publicly exposing himself. In the song Thank the Whites from a season 12 episode, Peter listed Bieber as one of white culture's contributions to the world, while pointing out that Bieber talks and dresses in ways associated with black culture. A joke that was doing several things at once, including pointing at the specific American tendency to elevate white performers who adopt black cultural styles, while the originators of those styles receive less reward. Kim Kardashian became one of the show's most consistent celebrity targets after the rise of Keeping Up with the Kardashians made the family synonymous with fame built on nothing in particular. The show went after Kardashian across multiple episodes, including a scene in Stewie's First Word where Peter describes his magic 8-ball in terms that reference Kardashian's sex tape and public image in the same breath, and Kardashian is shown having an emotional breakdown when the ball explodes. The season 14 episode An App a Day used a list of celebrities whose private images had been leaked online, Kardashian included, as a punchline about how fame in America is often tied to images people would rather had stayed private. The show was not making a sympathetic argument about privacy rights. It was pointing at the specific American celebrity economy, where personal scandal generates attention, attention generates followers, followers generate money, and the whole cycle keeps turning regardless of what the original content actually was. The show's treatment of Jimmy Fallon, the late-night host, ran across several episodes and focused on one very specific thing: his habit of laughing at his own jokes and glancing at the camera during sketches, which critics and audience audiences had noticed and mocked. In a season 4 scene set on Saturday Night Live, Peter actually beats Fallon up for doing it too much.
The joke is absurd, but what it is pointing at is real. Fallon's self-congratulatory performance style, his tendency to make the moment about his own reaction rather than the comedic content itself. The show was doing what American celebrity culture rarely does from the inside, calling out one of its most celebrated figures for a very specific and publicly observable habit. Sean Hannity, the Fox News host, was targeted in the episode Adam West High from season 17. In the episode, Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland compete with each other to deliver the most cutting insult about Hannity, looking at a photograph of him and trying to top each other's attacks. The show then cut to Peter building a Habitat for Humanity-style house for Hannity, labeled as a habitat for Sean Hannity, as a joke about dedicating good work to someone you strongly dislike. The episode aired at a point when Hannity was a central figure in American political media, and the show treated him as exactly what it treated all American celebrities, a public figure whose image required examination rather than acceptance. What runs through all of these moments, Brady, Bieber, Kardashian, Fallon, Hannity, Cruz, is a single, consistent argument about what American celebrity culture actually is. Not talent elevated to visibility, not earned attention. A system that takes certain people, assigns them enormous amounts of public importance, and then watches what those people do with it.
Family Guy's answer to what they do with it has been the same in 1999 as in 2025. They become worse. They absorb the entitlement the culture hands them. They perform a version of themselves that has less and less to do with any reality. They become icons of something, and the something they become icons of is usually a form of the same American mythology the show has been taking apart from the beginning. The idea that the people getting the most attention are the people who deserve it most. The show never resolved this. It did not point at celebrity culture, demolish it, and offer an alternative. It pointed at celebrity culture every season for 25 years, and then moved on to the next episode, which started the same way, with the Griffins sitting in front of a television, watching the same culture the show was born inside of. The show is part of that culture. It always was. MacFarlane became a celebrity himself. The show generated celebrity. It produced the kind of cultural attention it kept criticizing, and it never pretended otherwise, which is perhaps what separates Family Guy from the shows that critique American culture from a position of claimed distance. The show is not outside the thing it is mocking. It is inside it, on the same network, in the same living room, on the same screen. __quote _9 __. That tension, the show being part of the culture it criticizes, connects to the deepest question the show raises about America, which is not about celebrities or politicians or religion or any single target. It is about what it means to keep watching, season after season, a show that holds a mirror up to something you recognize. And the answer to that question brings everything the show has ever done back to a single, unavoidable truth about the relationship between Family Guy and the country that made it. Section 11. The FCC, American censorship, and the government's fear of free speech got the full Family Guy treatment. On February 1st, 2004, during the halftime show of Super Bowl 38, Justin Timberlake pulled at Janet Jackson's costume and briefly exposed her breast in front of an estimated 150 million viewers. The moment lasted less than a second. The Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. government body that regulates what can be broadcast on television and radio, received over 540,000 complaints about the incident. CBS, the network that broadcast it, was fined. The fine was eventually raised, appealed, raised again, and fought over in courts for years. The term wardrobe malfunction entered the English language and eventually made it into Merriam-Webster's dictionary. YouTube was founded partly because the incident demonstrated a demand for a place where people could find and share the footage the networks could not or would not show again. Family Guy's response to all of this was Season 4, Episode 14, the episode called PTV, which aired on November 6, 2005. Seth MacFarlane explained where the episode came from in a straightforward way. It came out of rage. His exact words were that it was rage over all the crap we have to deal with since Janet Jackson showed her boob. The show had been dealing with Fox's internal censors throughout its run. Scenes removed, words changed, jokes pulled before they could reach the screen, and the FCC's dramatic reaction to the Super Bowl incident, which led to a general crackdown on television content, made that situation worse. The writers decided to respond with an episode that made the argument as clearly and as loudly as the format would allow. In the episode, the FCC is triggered not by an actual Janet Jackson moment, but by a fictional version, actor David Hyde Pierce of the sitcom Frasier having a trouser accident during a live Emmy Awards broadcast. The FCC, whose chairman in the the episode is Cobra Commander from the G.I. Joe cartoon, receives 20 phone calls about the incident. The show's joke about this is precise. According to the FCC's logic, one call equals 1 billion people, which means 20 calls means 20 billion people were offended, roughly 3 times the population of the entire planet. The FCC, acting on this math, begins censoring television. What the FCC censors in the episode is a deliberate list of things from American television history that had previously been controversial or simply accepted as part of broadcast culture. Ralph Cramden's threats of spousal violence from the honeymooners get censored. 2/3 of Dick Van Dyke's name, the words Dick and Dyke, get bleeped out of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Chrissy Snow's bikini disappears from Three's Company. Archie and Edith Bunker, dressed as Ku Klux Klan members from All in the Family, get removed. The show was pointing out, with a long specific list, that the things the FCC suddenly found intolerable in 2004 had been present on American television for decades. The crackdown was not new standards being applied to new content. It was old content becoming newly unacceptable after a single incident involving a different network that none of the shows on the list had anything to do with. Peter, outraged, starts his own television network. He calls it PTV. On PTV, he broadcasts classic shows in their original, unedited versions and adds original programming, including a show called Dogs Humping, a Playboy After Dark style show hosted by Quagmire called Midnight Q, and the Peter Griffin Side Boob Hour. PTV is an enormous success. Lois, worried about the effect on children, calls the FCC to shut it down. The FCC arrives. Peter, Stewie, and Brian perform an elaborate musical number called The Freaking FCC, which describes the regulatory agency as stuffy, neurotic, and possibly psychotic, and details exactly what the regulations force everyone to say instead of what they actually mean. The FCC agents are impressed by the song. They shut PTV down anyway. Peter tells the FCC agents that they cannot stop people from being who they are. The FCC takes this as a challenge. They begin censoring the citizens of Quahog in real life, not just on television. Profanity in public conversation is bleeped with an air horn. Audible flatulence is banned. Physical affection is restricted. The FCC places a black bar over Peter's body when he steps out of the shower. Lois, who called the FCC in the first place, finds herself unable to have a normal conversation with her husband because every other word gets censored into incomprehensibility. At this point, Lois joins Peter's side. They travel to Washington to lobby Congress. The FCC, represented to Congress as necessary protection for decency, has the support of the politicians until Peter makes a final argument. He points at the buildings surrounding the Capitol and notes that the Washington Monument looks exactly like an erect body part. The Capitol building looks exactly like a large breast, and, Peter suggests, the Pentagon resembles something else entirely. Congress, unable to argue with the architectural evidence around them, reverses the FCC's restrictions. The episode ends with the family watching an uncensored version of The Brady Bunch, in which little Cindy tells her family about her poop while they all sit in the bathroom. Television Watch executive director Jim Dyke described the episode as a satire on the government's ever-increasing reach into people's living rooms. That is exactly what it was. McFarlane received a letter from the actual FCC about the episode, and later said in an interview that, to his surprise, they found it funny. The episode received a nomination for the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, though it did not win. Fox, the network that had been horse trading with the writers during production, removing a body part reference in exchange for keeping a dirty word, highlighted the episode in a special called TV's Funniest Moments, and the Parents Television Council, the conservative watchdog group that had been filing complaints against Family Guy since its premiere, named the rerun of PTV their worst TV show of the week in August of the same year. The show had managed to be simultaneously defended by Fox in a special about funny television and attacked by the PTC as the worst thing on that same television. This is a fairly accurate summary of Family Guy's entire relationship with American media standards. The show's direct engagement with censorship and free speech did not begin and end with PTV. The same fight played out at the content level across dozens of episodes. The most extreme example is the episode that never aired in America at all. In Season 8, Family Guy produced an episode called Partial Terms of Endearment. It was written by Danny Smith and directed by Joseph Lee, and it was intended to be the season finale in May 2010. The episode's plot follows Lois after she agrees to be a surrogate mother for an old college friend. When the biological parents are killed in a car accident, Lois is left alone with the pregnancy and has to decide what to do. She and Peter argue about it across the episode. Peter initially supports abortion, then switches to oppose it after being shown a video by anti-abortion activists, then switches again, until Lois ultimately decides to have an abortion. The show picks a side. It ends with Lois making the decision for herself, with the episode
treating that decision as the right one for this situation. Fox refused to broadcast the episode. Kevin Riley, then the president of Fox Entertainment, explained why. He said it was an extremely fragile subject matter at an extremely fragile economic time, and that abortion was the one issue that seemed most likely to cause trouble, and it simply was not worth it. He acknowledged that the subject matter was handled well. His decision not to air it was, by his own admission, based on finances and what advertisers would do, not on the quality of the episode or its content. The episode aired on BBC Three in the United Kingdom on June 20th, 2010, and was released on DVD in the United States on September 28th, 2010. Fox has never broadcast it. Adult Swim, the late-night block on Cartoon Network that aired Family Guy reruns, also declined to broadcast the episode at Fox's request. It is not available on Hulu. As of 2025, it is not on Disney+. It exists on DVD and certain paid download services, and nowhere else in America. McFarlane responded to the ban by pointing out the inconsistency directly. He told the New York Times that there was nothing about a woman's right to choose that should be treated differently from doing an episode about gay marriage or an episode about the oil spill. He said the network was making a decision based on people's current ability to handle and dissect controversial subjects. He did not say it was wrong for Fox to make that call as a business. He said it was a reflection of where America was at that time, a country that could watch 20-plus seasons of a show that mocked its government, its religion, its celebrities, and its families, but could not broadcast a single episode where a fictional woman made a decision about her own body. The two stories, PTV and Partial Terms of Endearment, describe the same situation from two directions. In PTV, the government reaches into private life and starts censoring things that people were doing perfectly comfortably until a regulation said they couldn't. The show's argument is that this is absurd, and that the instinct to control what people can see and say produces ridiculous results when taken to its logical end. In Partial Terms of Endearment, the network reaches into a completed piece of television and decides the American audience cannot handle watching it. The show's argument, made implicitly through its own absence from American airwaves, is that the line between what Americans are allowed to see and what they are not is drawn not by quality or truth or artistic merit, but by what is financially convenient for the people drawing the line. Family Guy spent over 25 years making fun of America's relationship with power, money, religion, celebrity, and politics. The story of what it could and could not put on television, the fights with the FCC, the arguments with Fox's censors, the horse trading over which words could stay and which body parts had to go, and finally a whole episode that the country that produced the show was not allowed to watch, is itself the most complete version of the argument the show was always making. The government and the corporations that profit from the government's preferences decide what Americans see, hear, and think about. The show made that argument for a quarter century. Then it made it one more time by disappearing from American screens entirely. __quote _10__. But there is one final argument that ties all of this together. Because for all the individual targets, religion, politics, race, gender, celebrity, censorship, the show has been making a unified claim since its very first episode. Not just about any one American institution, about all of them at once. And that claim is worth saying plainly, without a joke in front of it and without a cutaway to escape it. Section 12. The show has consistently framed American religion, consumerism, and nationalism as the same disease, just wearing different masks. Every single episode of Family Guy begins the same way. The same music starts, the same family appears on screen, Peter Griffin walks through the same front door, the same voices sing the same question over a full orchestra arrangement that sounds like it belongs in a Broadway theater from 1955. It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV. But where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely? Lucky there's a Family Guy. The theme song was written by Seth MacFarlane and David Zuckerman and scored by composer Walter Murphy, who has scored music for the show across its entire run. MacFarlane, Zuckerman, and Murphy received an Annie Award nomination for writing it in 2000, the year after the show first aired. The song has played at the opening of hundreds of episodes across 25 years. Millions of people know the melody well enough to hum it without thinking. And the entire thing is a lie told in plain sight. The question the song asks, where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely, is answered immediately by the show itself. Peter Griffin is the answer. He is the Family Guy the song is celebrating. He is the man who positively can do all the things that make us laugh and cry. He is the walking, breathing, drinking, yelling answer to the question about where American values went. And if you have watched even one episode of Family Guy at any point across its 25-year run, you already know exactly what Peter Griffin represents. He represents the problem. He has always been the problem. The show puts him forward as the solution,
and then spends 22 minutes per episode proving that description wrong.
Keith Booker, writing in his book Drawn to Television, described the theme song's irony with one sentence that captures what the show has been doing from the very beginning. He wrote that the lyrics celebrate precisely the kind of old-fashioned values that Family Guy overtly breaks. That is the entire joke of the opening. The music is grand, the presentation is cheerful, the family dances, the orchestra swells, and the man presented as the guardian of American values is the same man who, in the following episode, will commit fraud, abuse his daughter, embarrass his wife, lose his job through incompetence, and fall asleep drunk in front of a television. McFarlane described his own position in American culture in a quote that has appeared in multiple published interviews. He said, "He is the guy in the crowd making fun of the hero's shirt." That is a precise self-description. He is not outside the crowd. He is inside it, watching the same hero everyone else is watching, buying the same ticket and standing in the same place. But while everyone else looks at the hero, he is looking at what the hero is wearing and finding it ridiculous. Family Guy is that position applied to American culture at large. The show is not made from a foreign country looking in at America. It is made from inside America, broadcast on an American network, produced by American writers, watched by American audiences. And from that exact position, it has spent a quarter century looking at the hero's shirt. The religion piece of this argument was laid out in the earliest episodes and has never gone away. McFarlane confirmed in multiple interviews that he is an atheist who grew up Catholic. In a 2007 interview with the Daily Mirror in London, he said plainly that being in America means being in the land of the Jesus freaks, that he is not comfortable with that, and that he is very tired of it. He pointed at England as a place that seemed more logical and rational by comparison. That discomfort with organized religion in American life, specifically the way religious belief gets used to justify political positions, restrict personal freedoms, and divide the country into saved and unsaved, runs through the show's entire catalog. God appears as a dirty old man. Jesus becomes a celebrity who gets drunk and arrested. Born-again Christianity turns a lonely girl into someone who organizes book burnings of Darwin and Stephen Hawking. The church does not come off well across any of these episodes. But what the show has always been pointing at is not religion by itself. It is the shape that religion takes in American life when it gets combined with the other two things the show has been attacking all along: consumerism and nationalism. These three things, the show keeps suggesting, are not actually separate forces in American culture. They are the same impulse wearing three different sets of clothes. Look at how they overlap. American consumerism, the belief that buying things is the same as having a good life, that more stuff means more worth, that the economy of getting and spending is the core activity of being an American, works the same way as organized religion in one very specific sense. Both ask you to give yourself over to a system. Both promise that if you follow the rules, you will be rewarded. Both produce intense loyalty in their followers. Both punish deviation. The person who does not consume the right products and the person who does not believe the right things are both treated in American culture as slightly suspect, as people who have not accepted what they are supposed to accept. American nationalism does the same thing from a third direction. The belief that America is exceptional, that it is fundamentally better than other countries, that its values are universal values, that its way of doing things is the right way and other ways are wrong, is structurally identical to religious faith. It asks for the same kind of uncritical acceptance. It produces the same kind of in-group loyalty and out-group hostility. It responds to challenge with the same combination of defensiveness and contempt. And it combines with consumerism in the same way religious faith does. Because in America, buying the right products has always been entangled with demonstrating the right national identity. The American flag on the pickup truck, the military discount at the restaurant chain, the patriotic packaging on the soda can. Consumerism and nationalism in America have been speaking the same language for so long that most people cannot hear where one ends and the other begins. Family Guy has been making this argument across all three fronts simultaneously since 1999, usually without saying it directly, because the show knows, correctly, that the direct statement is the least effective way to make a point. Instead, it puts Peter Griffin in front of both systems at once and watches what happens. Peter buying things he cannot afford and does not need, ruining the family's finances for another week, is a picture of American consumerism as a compulsion rather than a choice. Peter talking about America as the greatest country on earth, with the total absence of any knowledge about other countries, is a picture of American nationalism as reflexive rather than considered. Peter attending church and then immediately doing something that violates every principle the church teaches is a picture of American religion as social performance rather than genuine belief. The show puts all three of these things in the same body, in the same house, and runs them forward for 25 years. The result is a portrait of a specific kind of American person, not an unusual or
or extreme one, but an ordinary one, for whom all three systems serve the same function. They provide identity without requiring examination. They give him something to belong to without requiring him to understand what he belongs to or why. Brian Griffin sits on the other end of this argument throughout the show's run. Brian is an atheist, a liberal, and a reader. He is also, as the show makes clear across dozens of episodes, a hypocrite who talks about his values while consistently failing to live by them. He lectures the family about politics and then does exactly what he lectures against. He talks about art and literature and then produces mediocre work. He positions himself as above the systems that trap Peter and then gets trapped by different but equivalent systems: ego, vanity, the need to be seen as intelligent. The show's argument is not that the Brian position is the correct one. It is that the Brian position is another version of the same problem, another identity adopted without full examination, another set of borrowed clothes that do not quite fit but get worn anyway because they feel better than being naked. McFarlane himself is inside this argument. He became one of the most recognizable names in American entertainment. He hosted the Academy Awards in 2013. He produced a version of the science series Cosmos in 2014 with host Neil deGrasse Tyson, co-executive producing alongside Ann Druyan. He released 9 music albums in the style of classic Hollywood and jazz performers. He built, from a show that was canceled twice and brought back through DVD sales, an institution so large that it survived every controversy, every critical dismissal, every attempt to call it irrelevant or harmful or past its prime. He did all of this from inside the American entertainment industry, the same industry the show spends every week criticizing, the same Fox network, the same celebrity culture, the same consumer economy that turns television into product and product into identity. This is the thing the show has been demonstrating, perhaps more honestly than it intended, for the entire length of its run. You cannot fully step outside the systems you are criticizing if you are using those systems to deliver the criticism. The show airs on Fox. Fox makes money from the advertising. The advertisers reach an audience of millions of Americans. Those millions of Americans watch the show that tells them their country's values are hollow, that their institutions are broken, that the things they have been told are important are mostly tools for keeping them in line. And then the credits roll, and then the ads play. And then the next week, the same family appears in the same house with the same problems and the same theme song asking the same question. Where are those good old-fashioned values? Lucky there's a Family Guy. The 25 years of the same opening, the same house, the same question is not an accident or a creative failure. The show not resolving its own contradictions is not a flaw. It is the argument. The fact that nothing in Quahog ever meaningfully changes, that Peter never becomes a better father, that the suburb never becomes a better place, that the institutions the show attacks remain standing and functioning and profitable after every episode, is the show saying something that very few American television programs have been willing to say plainly across such a long period of time. The systems are not broken. They are working exactly as intended. They just are not working for the people who live inside them. Family Guy has been making that argument in plain sight, behind a laugh track, on the most famous conservative news network in America for over a quarter century. It dressed the argument in cutaway gags and celebrity jokes and musical numbers. It made it easy to watch without engaging with it, and millions of people did exactly that. But for the people who looked closely, who noticed what was being said between the jokes and what was being shown behind the laughter, the show has always been one of the most sustained and honest critiques of American life that mainstream entertainment has ever produced. Not because it had all the answers, but because it kept asking the same question every single week, in the same living room, with the same family, for 25 years. And because the answer it kept arriving at was the one that the country it was born inside of has always found hardest to sit with. The problem is not the violence in the movies. The problem is not the sex on television. The problem is not any one institution, or any one politician, or any one celebrity, or any one episode that went too far. The problem is the same thing it has always been: the willingness to keep watching without asking what it is exactly that you are watching. And the fact that you are still here, at the end of this, is the show's final joke. The one it has been building towards since January 31st, 1999. Lucky there's a Family Guy. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.